Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Busting Myths About Next Generation Refrigerants. I'm Caitlin Logson, the Programs Coordinator at Urban Green, and I'll just be providing a quick technical overview for today's webinar. If you experience any audio or video issues during the course, you can send me a message via the chat box, which should be visible at the bottom of your screen. And you can submit questions through the questions box or Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as well, which I'll be monitoring throughout today's discussion. And we'll try to get through as many questions as possible during the second half of today's program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to get us started.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Mandyke. I'm the CEO of Urban Green and thrilled to welcome you to this special program that will take a deep dive into the future of refrigerants. Now, we came upon this topic because it's come to us in several different forms over the last year. It first came to us in our electrification convening, where we examined the transition to heat pumps. But the uncertainty and the future of refrigerants kept coming up as a potential barrier for building owners. And so we thought, really understanding, is it a barrier or not, based on past refrigerant phase outs, would be a great program. And then secondly, in the course of just Local Law 97 and the interest to upgrade machine rooms around the city, particularly chillers and rooftop units, the issue of refrigerants has come back front and center. So today we've assembled a fantastic panel, the best of the best in the industry, to provide a global perspective on where we're going with refrigerants in the future. We're going to look at the science of refrigerants and why certain chemicals are chosen over others. We're going to look at the background for why actually we're going through this transition from an environmental perspective. We're going to look at the code and regulatory implications, which are very, very large and still looming. And then the technology trends on what we can expect over this next generation of refrigerants. Now, I feel like this is old home week for me because in my previous career, I was responsible for global refrigerant policy for a large HVAC company. So it's great to be back to my technical roots on these issues, and it's great to welcome many of my old colleagues and friends to the program today. So we're in for a great program. We're going to go through the presentations and then open up for questions. And we'll have plenty of time for questions to dig into the details. So this is your chance with this outstanding panel of global expertise to ask whatever you want. So let's dive right into it. Our first speaker today is Dick Lord. Dick is a senior fellow at Carrier Corporation, and he's going to lead us off with the background on why we are going through yet again another transition for refrigerants. So Dick, let me turn the program over to you.
All right, great. Caitlin, are you going to bring up the presentation? Yeah.
Yep, you should be able to see it.
Actually, I don't. Try something. Yeah, I don't see it yet, Caitlin. You sharing your screen?
Yep, it's shared. You might need to click.
Okay, never mind. It was my fault.
Got there? Great.
All right, so let's start off with a little bit of a history lesson. Since the 1980s, we've been under pressure in the industry to change refrigerants. The first issue is really ozone depletion, so that you can kind of see that on the screen there. Refrigerants have a detrimental effect on the ozone layer, and the ozone layer kind of protects us against some of the harmful radiation that comes from the sun. It was first addressed by the Montreal Protocol, actually started in the city of Montreal, and it was approved in 1987. And that started to phase out a lot of the CFC refrigerants. And you can see some of the old refrigerants there, R11, R12, R500, 502, and that really started in 2004. It was followed by a second phase to phase out HCFCs, and that went from 2010 to 2020. The big one, R22, was phased out by the US government early in 2010. And we've done a good job on that. I'll talk about that in a little bit in the next slide. The second issue is really global warming, and that's the one that's now giving us all the pressure to change refrigerants yet again. So global warming is a result of the emission of greenhouse gases, and refrigerants are a very potent greenhouse gas. They're not the only greenhouse gas, CO2 emissions that come from our power plants, which is why everybody's looking to be carbon neutral. And there's a lot of other gases that go into the upper atmosphere that cause global warming. Now, the agreement that goes after global warming gases is the Montreal Kigali Agreement. And Montreal Protocol was very successful in pulling the world together to try to phase out these refrigerants, which is a difficult thing to do to get many countries around the world to align. So they basically said after they got the ozone depletion Montreal Protocol done, they went after the Kigali Agreement. And that was addressed, that was really approved on 10/25/2018. Let's go to the next slide. So, I mean, here's a little bit of a history lesson on ozone depletion. You can see back in the 1970s, there really wasn't an ozone hole. And then we quickly started to cause ozone depletion. And you can see in 2015 what the hole looks like. Right now, it looks like we're making good progress. We're starting to see, you know, the ozone hole start to close. It's going to take a long time to really get it resolved. And you can see we won't be back to 1970 levels until 2065. But good progress is being made. The Montreal Protocol continues to watch this. They analyze emissions globally, and they take a look at corrective actions where there's issues. Next slide. So global warming is the one that we now face. And, you know, there's a correlation between CO2 and global temperature rise. Now, a lot of people argue that it's a cyclic thing, but we're definitely seeing trends. And you can see the CO2 levels rising from the 1880s up to where we are now, and you can see the temperature going along with it. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see the greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is definitely the largest one. Fluorinated gases, which are refrigerants, they're about 3%, but that's a little misleading because refrigerants are much more potent in terms of global warming. They can be anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 times the impact of CO2. So this is why there's a lot of focus on fluorinated gases, and also nitrous oxides and methanes, and you can see those in there. So a lot of effort in the industry to look at all these greenhouse gases. Next slide. So you can really divide them into three types of scopes. So scope one is the direct emissions. So that's where we emit the refrigerants that go directly into the atmosphere. But when you look at HVAC, HVAC is a big user of energy in buildings, about 60% of the energy in buildings. So it uses a lot of power. Historically in the US, about 86% of our power has been generated by fossil fuel. We're starting to change as we do renewables. But, you know, as we look at phasing out refrigerants, we also need to keep a very close eye on efficiency. And so you'll see DOE pushing as hard on efficiency while EPA pushes as hard on emissions. Next slide. So just a little bit of history on global warming. You can kind of see up in the left-hand corner. This is as of July 2019. The dark reds means record warm temperatures, and you guys have all seen this. Down in the lower half-hand corner, you can see the temperature rise. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, every July, we tend to exceed the temperature of the last July. Now, this year's been a little bit strange, but one of the concerns in the industry is, you know, if you look at like the Paris Agreement, they set a goal not to exceed 2 degrees C. And, you know, we're about 1 degree C up right now. And, you know, there's been no downward trend in this temperature. So, you know, although there's starting to be legislation on global warming, we really haven't turned the tide like we have on ozone depletion. And 2 degrees, there's a lot of negative things that'll happen in the environment if we hit that level. Next slide. So what's the agreements that have been done? There was the Paris Agreement. That's had mixed success. The US did not sign it. The US didn't sign it because of a lot of issues with, you know, productivity and, you know, how our industry works. The Kigali Agreement, that was developed. That has been pretty widely accepted. As of last week, there was 106 countries that have approved it. It took 20 to ratify it. It takes 70 to get into trade sections by 2030. The US has not approved it yet. This is a big issue. Actually part of this election campaign, if any of you guys have watched that. There is some work underway to, you know, typically an agreement like a Kigali Agreement takes a 2/3 majority of Congress because it's a treaty and it requires the Senate approval. The EPA is trying to work around this, so there's some work underway right now called the American Innovation Manufacturing Act, trying to give authority to EPA to regulate it. One of the things EPA did is they tried to regulate it with Rule 20 and 21. And sorry, you guys can still hear. I just lost my mic. So they tried to approve with Rule 20 and 21. Those were vacated by the courts. So now they're working on the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, trying to find a way to get around it. There's a SNAP Rule 23 that's out for review right now. And so a lot of things are happening. But what's really happening in the US, which is concerning to a lot of us, it's being done at a state level. So there's, the US Climate Alliance, they've basically established a group of states that are concerned about our environment, and they've started to pass legislation. Most active state has been California. They're working to try and ban the use of 410A, which is one of the largest used refrigerants that we all use on our equipment. But several other states have joined, including New York State, which just a week or so ago passed Regulation 6, Part 494, which really adopts Rule 20 and 21, goes into effect as early as 2021. Next slide. So this is just a chart that I often use that shows all the phase down requirements for refrigerants. You can see the green line represents the US. We're considered what we call a developed country. So we have to start phasing down. The big phase down will come in 2024. And so a lot of refrigerants will be changing in 2024. The purple line on the left-hand side is basically the F-gas requirement in Europe. Europe is usually much more accelerated than the US. So a lot of the new refrigerants have already been implemented. Some of the other guys will probably talk about that. And then on the red line and the blue line represents the developing countries, and they lobbied for a longer time frame. The one we're focused on a lot right now is the orange line, which is California, the CARB requirements. And there's a lot of debate underway right now because one of the things that slows the implementation of when we can do this is regulations, and some of the other guys will talk about that. Next slide. So just in summary, this is the fourth time we've been through refrigerants. It started back with the CFCs and HFCs, and now we're a lot of talk about let's set targets for GWPs lower than 750. That's kind of what's in the CARB requirement. That will not probably be enough to get us to the final Kigali phase down. So we're probably going to see even another phase at GWPs of 150 to 300. The industry is doing a lot of work on it. A lot depends on how much reclaim and how much charge reduction we do in units. The thing I want to stress is that, refrigerants are one thing, but we also need to keep an eye on efficiency. And, we've had a dramatic increase in efficiency since the beginning of this, with about a 61% improvement. But we need to continue that effort, and it's going to take new approaches on efficiency that we're looking at. So, one of the biggest issues we're facing now with the refrigerants is all the regulations, the state regulations, the building codes, and we'll talk more about that today as we get into it. All right, next slide. I think that's the last one.
Okay, Dick, thank you very much for helping to lay that very good and solid foundation on some of the science and the environmental pressures for why we're moving to different refrigerants. I'm going to turn it over to Doug Tucker now. Doug is the Director of Industry and Government Relations for Mitsubishi Electric. Doug is going to help us dive in and look at ASHRAE and among other implications for how we look at this, particularly from a heat pump VRF perspective. So Doug, let's turn the program over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Let's start going over a little summary of the Going Electric report, which was issued by Urban Green in April of 2020, that focused on retrofitting New York City's multifamily buildings. One primary recommendation is the use of heat pumps as a component of electrification. The report describes the benefits of heat pumps, including a reduction in carbon footprint of most multifamily buildings, an improvement in air quality, resident control of temperature, expanded access to cooling, and reduction of heat-related illnesses. Next slide, please. So variable refrigerant flow, or VRF heat pumps, are well suited for use in either building retrofits or new construction. Installation is possible in tight spaces because the piping design and compact components of VRF systems require less space than conventional ducted systems. VRF also offers considerable efficiency improvements over traditional systems because the outdoor units feature an inverter-driven compressor that varies the speed allowing it to precisely control each zone's load requirement while reducing power consumption. So on the screen, you see an excerpt from Steve's great article in the ASHRAE Journal on flammability and new refrigerant options. Because the lower GWP refrigerants currently available for use in comfort and conditioning equipment are flammable, systems with larger refrigerant charge sizes, such as VRF, will have to change their form or provide safety mitigation to comply with the safety standards and building codes. Next slide, please. So why is this an issue for refrigerant intensive systems such as VRF? ASHRAE Standard 15 is the standard for safety of refrigeration systems and is the basis of the model codes for comfort conditioning systems. Standard 15 states that a complete discharge of a refrigerant circuit into a space cannot exceed the refrigerant concentration limit for that refrigerant being used, which is specified in ASHRAE Standard 34. For direct systems such as VRF, the standard assumes the complete discharge of the entire system through one individual indoor unit in the event of a leak. For R410A, the refrigerant that we currently use, the allowable concentration is 26 pounds per 1,000 cubic feet. So a 10 by 10 by 10 space with no openings to other spaces can be served by a system with a charge not exceeding 26 pounds of refrigerant. A discharge in a package system, like the rooftop system on the right, can be dispersed through the entire volume of space served by that system, so the resulting concentration is lower. Advance, please. So you can see where the refrigerant concentration is and how it would be higher in a smaller space than a larger space, and why we're very careful with, even with R410A systems right now, not to exceed that. When the industry moves to lower GWP refrigerants, the refrigerant concentration limits are significantly reduced. In the case of R32, the refrigerant that's being used now in Asia and Europe to comply with their F-gas regulations, the RCL is less than 5 pounds per 1,000 cubic feet. So the use of direct systems above a certain charge will require safety mitigation to reduce the chances of ignition of leaked refrigerant. Next slide, please. Risk assessment for the use of the A1 refrigerants like R410A, non-flammable refrigerants, in unitary and VRF is very straightforward. The RCL is based on the oxygen deprivation limit, and the maximum concentration possible during the leak cannot exceed that RCL. For systems using A2L class refrigerants, which is what we expect after the transition, the concentration limits are based on flammability. Refrigerant charge size is the most dependable and controllable mitigation factor, since minimum room volumes are not easily anticipated or enforced, and ignition sources in occupied spaces are hard to control. The current product safety standards, based on an IEC standard called 60335-2-40, allow for a charge size of up to 4 pounds of R32 to be used without installation restrictions. Larger charge sizes require the use of refrigerant detection and air circulation as a mitigation method for dispersing a potential refrigerant leak. Additional measures for multi-split VRF systems include shutoff valves in the system to prevent further progression of a leak. And I'll note that there are currently over 100 million R32 air conditioning and heat pump systems that have been installed worldwide without safety incidents. Next slide. So where VRF in its traditional form is not feasible due to code restrictions or economical due to increased costs of safety mitigation, there are options that exist to take advantage of its efficiency benefits. In this example, we see a VRF outdoor unit integrated with a non-VRF air handling unit in an existing space and existing ductwork, and that system would be controlled by a linear expansion valve. This is currently something available from most manufacturers of VRF equipment for R410A systems. It will be a good option when we transition to lower GWP refrigerants. Next slide, please. This is another solution to the problem of refrigerant concentrations exceeding allowable limits in occupied space. A VRF outdoor unit can be paired with a refrigerant to water heat exchanger. Water piping from the heat exchanger provides heating and cooling to the indoor fan cool units, so no refrigerant is in the space being conditioned. This product is currently very popular in hotels, offices, and multifamily buildings in Europe, where they have an F-gas regulation limiting the GWP refrigerants. And it's available in both R410A and R32 refrigerants in those countries. So whether traditional VRF is used with safety mitigation or alternate solutions are sought, after the transition to lower GWP refrigerants, VRF and unitary systems will be available to take advantage of their efficiency and flexibility, particularly for the retrofit market and to support the electrification of buildings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doug, for that overview. You know, the VRF system is really important as we look to the future of electrification and part of the genesis of this program. So we appreciate that deep dive there. We're now going to turn to John Sheff. John is the Director of Public Safety and Industry Affairs at Danfoss. John's going to help us look at some of the regulations and particularly code issues related to refrigerants, and to help us really understand, you know, where we're going. You know, the title of this program is Busting Myths, because there's just a lot of uncertainty and sometimes a lot of misinformation about where we're going with the future of refrigerants. I think John can help us kind of sort that out on where we are with regulations and where they might be going. So John, let me turn the program over to you.
Great, thanks, John. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. This is a very dynamic and fluid situation, and in fact, there's been activity just this week on some of these things. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on some of the items that Dick mentioned earlier in the presentation, and kind of the state of play on HFC and refrigerant policy and regulations across the country, and as it pertains to New York as well. So Dick mentioned SNAP rules 20 and 21. These rules regulated chillers and commercial refrigeration, and they basically mirrored the first two steps of the Kigali phase down as it pertains to the US. Now, they were vacated by the courts in 2017 because a couple of refrigerant manufacturers sued, and the courts agreed with them that these refrigerants and global warming was not covered under the Clean Air Act. So these rules were vacated back a few years ago. Now, in response to the Paris Climate Accord, the U.S. Climate Alliance was formed. This is 25 member states, and it represents 55% of the US population and almost a $12 trillion economy. So a lot of money and a lot of population in the US. And 10 of those member states, as part of their commitments, have either begun regulating HFCs or stated that they will do so. And again, as Dick mentioned, most of these states, except all except California, have said that they will implement SNAP rules 20 and 21 as they were as they were devised before the 2017 vacation. In New York, that means commercial refrigeration starts an implementation date of January 1st, 2021, and for chillers, it's January 1st, 2024. And what the SNAP rules 20 and 21 did was, instead of prescribing which refrigerants you could use or which or a global warming potential that you need to get under, it just basically banned HFCs after these dates, and then relied on the industry to come up with some alternatives. And we'll get to that in just a second here. Now, but stay on that slide, please. Yep, thanks. So even though we're focused on New York here, it's instructive to look at what California is doing, because they are the only state that's going beyond SNAP rules 2021. And they are actually the only one that's begun regulating residential and light commercial air conditioning as well. And what they've done is set a GWP limit of 750. And like I mentioned, this is a fluid situation, and just this week they've come out with some revised proposals. They were looking at a 2023 implementation date, but they were not able to get their building codes updated to allow for A2Ls. Their fire commissioners were looking at the building codes and looking to see if they could get them updated for a 2023 implementation date. Just this week, they announced that they were not going to do that. And so their normal code cycle would update in 2024. And obviously that would not allow the codes to be updated for a 2023 implementation date. So it's now likely that California will move to a January 1st, 2025 implementation date for residential air conditioning, like commercial air conditioning as well. So that just happened yesterday. And so, like I said, it is a very fluid and dynamic situation. For commercial refrigeration, their rules have not changed significantly. They're looking at a global warming potential limit of 150, and that would basically push new installations into a CO2 or natural refrigerants. The other interesting thing that they're doing is using a portfolio approach for grocery stores. So stores would use a weighted average GWP across multiple stores. So each store would not need to be retrofitted or updated to use lower GWP refrigerants, but they could balance it across their entire portfolio. Now, why is it important to look at what California is doing in relation to New York, even though New York is not quite there in terms of regulating air conditioning? Well, if we move to the next slide, we are, as Dick mentioned, we are looking at the AIM Act, the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, and this would give EPA the authority to phase down HFCs. Now, this is a phase down and not a phase out, so 410A would still be available and widely available for some time. So that's not necessarily a concern. In the bill, there's no federal preemption, which means that states can still go beyond what EPA is prescribing. And currently, the bill is it's been agreed upon by the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Republicans and Democrats agree on this language, and it's been approved as part of the Senate Republicans' energy bill. And so this is kind of a grab bag of different energy and environmental bills that have been kicking around for a while. And it's unlikely to get done before the election, but even if we have a second Trump administration, this could happen early in 2021 or as we go through 2021. And should we have a change in administration, it's likely to be a priority for the Senate Democrats. Now, again, why is looking at California important? Because there have been names kicked around for EPA administrators should there be a change in administration. And one of the potential names is Mary Nichols, who is the CARB administrator. So she has experience with HFCs, and it's important to look at what California is doing for the rest of the country should that happen. Now, when we look at SNAP rules, SNAP Rule 23, SNAP Rule 23 is a proposal. It's out for comment now, but it did list R32 and R454B as acceptable alternatives for 410A. So that means that once building codes are updated, OEMs can then start selling these units, even if we don't have a national phase down in place. Now, should the AIM Act pass, the industry will start advocating for likely for a January 1st, 2025 implementation date with states and with the EPA. So as soon as the AIM Act is passed, and even potentially before it's signed by the president, the industry will start negotiating with the EPA on some of these dates and some of these limitations. So it's important to keep an eye on that. Now, Dick mentioned the Kigali Amendment and the timing there. Something important to remember is that the U.S., even though we are not currently members or signees to the Kigali Agreement, there are some trade restrictions and with the other countries that are members. So it's important for us to comply with it. And we have to start this phase down by 2026 in some capacity in order to comply with Kigali using A2Ls alone instead of going to lower GWP refrigerants like A3s that have a higher flammability than A2Ls. And given our experience trying to update building codes for A2Ls, it's important to get this phase down started by 2026 to avoid having to do it for even higher flammability refrigerants.
Okay, thank you, John. I have a lot of questions related to the code, so I'm keeping them. We'll come back and we'll talk about those in the Q&A, but appreciate that overview. It is a dynamic situation, and that's part of, I think, the interest and the concern that we've seen from our members and building owners in New York is just trying to get a handle of where that could be going. I'll remind the audience, we'll be coming up on Q&A soon. So in the Q&A box, you can enter your questions. We have a new feature this time where you can upvote other questions that your colleagues have placed in there if you'd like to put them at the top of the list. So please start thinking of your questions and load those. We'll be into that soon. So finally, our last speaker today is Steve Kujak. Steve is the Director of Next Generation Refrigerant Research at Trane. Steve's going to talk to us about where we're going next from a refrigerant standpoint, what some of the options might be. So Steve, let me turn the program over to you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give a quick update on refrigerant innovation that's occurring. And the previous speakers have mentioned a number of new refrigerants that we're considering in the next transition. And some speakers have talked to regulations and to codes and standards as well. But from the standpoint of refrigerants, new low GWP refrigerants in the marketplace, the transition has begun. There are products available that are non-flammable in nature, refrigerants that are being used. So they're, without regulation, they're being adopted. So to talk a little bit about, the investigations the industry has been occurring over the last 10 years or so. In the last transition, when we went from CFCs, HCFCs to HFCs, we were able to preserve safety around flammability. So we didn't have to understand, how much refrigerant we can use and how it affects designs. That's occurring right now. So there's a lot of work being done in that area to define what flammability means and how it affects our equipment designs. And you can see some innovation is already occurring around equipment designs that Doug presented. So when you select a refrigerant, with the figure on the right, there's economic, environmental, and social demands around the characteristics of a fluid that needs to be developed, and safety is a really important issue, as well as efficiency. We expect the refrigerant obviously will meet regulation around GWP and ODP, but a building owner also has to be concerned around reducing emissions as well. And so as a designer like myself, the blue items around the outside are all the different things and characteristics that we have to consider around selecting and designing a piece of equipment. So we have to balance, key things around the direct GWP, the efficiency, the safety, but there's also the transition costs, not just the cost to the OEMs, but the cost to consumers and customers as well. There's also intellectual property that slows the transition or prevents certain things from occurring across the industry easily. And then one of the things that's important is how sustainable is that product going to be when you adopt it with a new refrigerant in the marketplace. Even it might be an interim step, like Dick mentioned, there might be an interim step for some of these refrigerants where we adopt one refrigerant, then we move forward. So people should know that the industry is working very hard on flammability, and what we've learned about flammable refrigerants, even if they're 2L, or, lower flammability to higher flammability like propane, they're all flammable and they all have to be treated with respect. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the toolbox. I'm gonna get a little geeky here and be a chemist for a little bit. And these are all the new molecules. So the industry has been working very hard on trying to find new fluorinated molecules that preserve safety, being non-flammable, or be as low flammable as possible while having low GWP. So this is kind of the toolbox the industry has been working with. We have these new materials called HFOs, or hydrofluoroolefins, that react quickly in the atmosphere and come out. So they don't contribute to ozone depletion. They don't contribute to global warming specifically. So we have a mixture of mostly new molecules, but people are going to be seeing, natural refrigerants, as we call it, or other options around ammonia, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbons, or propane or isobutane, which is in the marketplace already today in small bottle cooler type applications. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a slide showing the GWP on the left-hand axis, the different colored dots, the blue ones are non-flammable. The red ones are what we call lightly flammable. And then I've put a few on here for calibration around propane and ammonia. And so if you build the slide, please. So there's kind of a natural line around the innovation at this point where, as we try to get to lower GWP, we need to get below 300 or 150. As you can see on the left, keep building the slide, just keep building it. You see the lower pressure refrigerants that are replacing 123 large water-cooled chillers. We have a lot of options that are non-flammable and very low GWP. And as we move to the right, as we replace different refrigerants, we can get down in GWP or lower our GWP impact with some interim steps, in the 134A space. So as we look at air-cooled chillers, we look at 404A R22-like materials, we can get down to about 1300. And then with 410A, we have to jump to either, R32 or 454B, but those also will be interim steps as well. So build the slide out, please. So we have available candidates that are non-flammable for the low pressure, large water-cooled chillers that might be used in large office spaces. 134A, we can get to the 300 to 600 range as an interim step, which, 300 might be, long-term compatible with the Kigali Agreement. We have 404A, we have to jump to flammability to get below 300. So, but we have some good interim steps that people can use to retrofit their equipment. So, as part of product sustainability, you want, your existing equipment to be able to be retrofitted at some point to a lower GWP, potentially to continue your investment, get your investment out of your equipment. And then 410A, there is some innovation going around on a new molecule, 466A, or refrigerant blend that's non-flammable, but currently 32 and 454B are class 2 flammable, but available to be used once the standards and codes are updated into the building environment. Last slide, please. So what refrigerant actions should I take? And, customers ask me that all the time, and I say, well, you don't buy refrigerant, you buy equipment. And efficiency is the most important thing. And, what are you doing to maintain the efficiency and the leaks on your current equipment with your current refrigerants? So, currently there's low GWP refrigerant innovation is ongoing with a balance of known science and proven technologies. And there are some long-term solutions available, specifically large water-cooled chillers where we have GWPs less than 10 that will be long-term compatible with Kigali Agreement. So your challenge is to find the safest, best balance enables the lowest emissions, the highest efficiency, and the lowest life cycle costs are key. So you need to take a balanced approach at these interim steps around the refrigerant and the efficiency. But more importantly, what I see is maintaining installed equipment is also key. Leak tightness and efficiency to reduce greenhouse gas impacts. So when you look at a lot of different studies, and like in Project Drawdown, you need to be aware of the impacts you have with existing installed base as you replace equipment as well. So there are alternatives available today, but only the non-flammable ones can be adopted quickly, and they are being adopted even without regulation in place. Standards and codes are already compliant. So long-term, with GWPs less than 10, we have 514A in the marketplace. We have 1233ZDE in the marketplace. These are being sold globally, even into developed countries as well. So these are large water-cooled products, greater than 200 tons. There are some interim materials replacing 134A at this point in air conditioning refrigeration applications. One is 513A, which is available today. Longer term, we're gonna have to be less than 150 or 300, and we may have some flammable refrigerants we'll have to deal with maybe in the 2024 to 2028 timeframe when standards and regulation are updated. For unitary, by far the largest marketplace, which is 410A replacements, we have 32 and 454B. People have selected, but we must wait for the transition until we have updated standards and codes like John Sheff had mentioned, and Dick. These options, are interim steps, like Dick Lord had mentioned. They're flammable and will need to adjust practices, as you saw Doug Tucker adjusting designs as well. But Longer term solutions, less than 300, maybe less than 150, won't be available till after 2028 as innovation develops. So a key takeaway here is understand the facts, evaluate your options, and plan and prepare for tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve, for that. So we're going to get to the audience Q&A in just a minute. I have some discussion topics I'd like us to dive into first. So just a reminder to type your questions in the Q&A box there, and you and your colleagues can upvote the questions you like best. But let me just start for the panel here with just some basics and obvious. So why are you guys looking at flammability in the first place? What's forcing the industry to even consider flammability for next gen refrigerants?
Yeah, so, you know, from a chemistry standpoint, as we go to lower GWP, we need things that are more reactive in the atmosphere. And that involves putting hydrogen on molecules. Well, hydrogen likes to burn, right? So in the original days when we put fluorines and chlorines on molecule, that was to suppress flammability. But one of the ways to get there to our goals of lower GWP, we need to add hydrogens back to the molecule, which involves they turn flammable. Like in the case of propane, you have nothing but hydrogens on the molecule, or you have 2Ls like R32, which has a couple of fluorines on the molecule to reduce flammability, but the hydrogens are higher, and there's enough there to cause flammability. So to get to our goals, we need to deal with flammable refrigerants at this point.
And so really to suppress the flammability, you have to go into the ozone depletion range. Is that the trade-off?
No, we don't have to go in the ozone depletion range. You can add other reactive species to the molecules, like the hydrofluorophans. You have the carbon-carbon double bond, and then you fluorinate the material to that point. The problem is getting the right pressure for the application you need. So we have fewer molecules to deal with in the 410A space. And so at the higher pressure, the lower pressure ones, we have that ability to design molecules to have that operating pressure.
Okay, and then are these, Doug, maybe to ask you this, I mean, are these the low flammability refrigerants that we're looking at, particularly in applications for yours for VRF, are these any more concern than other flammable substances in HVAC already in the building? For example, natural gas for steam heat. I mean, are there orders of magnitude here, or are we really talking about trading out one concern for another light concern?
Yes, that's the refrigerants that are being used right now in Asia and Europe, and particularly R32, has been used for several years now. It is an A2L. It's very hard to ignite. It is an order of magnitude less as far as flammability concerned than propane, natural gases, other systems that might be in the building. They still have to be looked at. It's a new for this application. So we are doing research through ASHRAE, through AHRI, our industry association, and how these refrigerants behave in typical applications, what it takes to ignite them, and what the result is after they are ignited, and how that could be applied. And all this is feeding into the building codes and the safety standards. And we feel like we have a pretty good handle on it in the United States. The UL product safety standard that's adopted from the IEC safety standard is a little stricter. There's a higher safety standard that's been applied to it versus what's being used right now in other countries. So that's where we are. We would prefer a non-flammable solution, but for these types of comfort conditioning systems where you need high pressures, that's what we're looking at right now.
Right, maybe Dick, over to you. You know, Steve started to talk about, did a nice job. Maybe you could chime in too about just the different parameters that you have to think about when you look at new refrigerants. I mean, I think people don't sometimes realize that the periodic table of elements is finite. And so it's really just like swapping proportions of chemicals back and forth to reach the Goldilocks moment for what it can work. But what is that Goldilocks moment? What are the factors that you're trying to balance? Efficiency, safety? I mean, can you just help us think through what the rubric is that you go through? And you're on mute, Dick. But still can't
Hear you.
Not yet. Why don't you play with that? We'll come back to that question for you, Dick. Maybe over to you, John, though, on one of the biggest questions that we have from building owners is, particularly if you look at electrification, is the concern, well, if I'm going to electrify and install heat pumps and the regulations are going to change, do I have to rip these systems out? So can you tell us about how past refrigerant transitions have happened, and do they really obsolete existing equipment or not?
Well, like we mentioned, this will likely be a phase down, not a phase out. And so in the previous phase out, R22, which was the dominant refrigerant that was being phased out for residential AC, was just phased out in 2020. So now you can no longer get virgin R22, but it took a very long time. Now, this is, like we mentioned, a phase down. So there will be 410A available for new systems and for servicing. So no, as soon as these rules go into place, building owners will not need to rip out their existing systems. They'll still be able to service and maintain. And there are, the regulations will have definitions of what is a retrofit, what is a new piece of equipment that will regulate, when new refrigerants need to be used. And in fact, in SNAP rules 20 and 21, the definition of what a retrofit is or what is new is when a refrigerant change is made in the system. So unless you're making a wholesale change in refrigerant, you don't need to change the system there. So I don't think there is necessarily a lot of cause for concern, particularly in some of these other places other than California. Now in California, there was, particularly in commercial refrigeration, a lot of pushback from the grocery store owners over these definitions of what is new, what is retrofit. And eventually the industry came together with the regulators and came to a solution, and that was this portfolio approach. So as long as industry is engaged with the regulators and communicating, I don't see too much cause for concern there.
Because John, can I just add one point to John,
sure.
Sheff? What we're seeing in the industry as we transition, people have to realize as we adopt flammables, the existing equipment cannot be retrofitted with a flammable refrigerant. And that is some confusion that's occurring right now as 32 and 454B are being introduced in the marketplace. I guess they're not in equipment yet. We have to look at the standards, but I can see that confusion occurring. Mm-hmm. So people have to realize we'll have 410 available. You have to take care of it with 410A. Don't put 32 or 454B in your 410 equipment. Okay, so there's going to be that little bit of confusion that occurs in the marketplace in this transition.
Yeah, excellent point, Steve.
But I guess it's probably helpful for building owners to look back at the previous phase outs. The way EPA does this is they don't phase out the use of the product, they phase out the manufacture of new systems. Mm-hmm. So if a building owner today electrifies and puts in 410A heat pumps, those are legal for their life, mm-hmm. Based on precedent. And then the issue becomes the availability of the refrigerant, which you have mentioned will be in supply for a long time. And then of course you can reclaim and recycle refrigerant. There are hundreds and hundreds of CFC chillers still operating in New York City today.
Absolutely. If you want R22, you can find it today. So not an issue. And
so that's I think that's a big point to clear up, because when in our research for the electrification report, that turned out to be one of the #1 barriers is the misunderstanding about phase out. Does that mean my system becomes illegal? And I think it's important to underscore that the way the U.S. has adopted these regulations is that existing systems are grandfathered with service clauses that can service the life of the system going forward. Dick, were you able to come back online?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, we can. Perfect.
Yeah. Maybe just one thing to add to that, John.
Yeah.
Is it's like you said, when we phased out the CFCs, we found out that it became beneficial to reclaim R11. You can still get R11 routinely. In fact, I just checked last week, and we still have close to 5,000 R11 chillers running, and people still get the refrigerant. And the same thing is going to happen with 410A. it doesn't go away. You'll have it for your service.
Right. And then maybe Dick, just your thoughts on the design elements. Like, what are the trade-off? What are you trying to design for? And then what are the trade-offs you're doing with the periodic table of elements, which is finite? And so what's the Goldilocks moment there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, primarily, it's a balance between cost, efficiency, the refrigerant, safety. So it's all the things that, Steve had on his chart. We look closely at the design. One of the things you're going to find, there's not going to be a perfect refrigerant that fits all applications. Like if you look at a residential split system, somebody might say, well, geez, why don't you use one of those low pressure refrigerants? Well, you can't run a 6-inch line through the wall of your house to get the refrigerant back and forth to the house. So you can do some of those things on large chillers. You can't do them on small chillers. But there's a lot of innovative things that people are looking at. And, it's trying to keep the efficiency high as well as improve it. One of the things, keep in mind, everybody, that we have a huge efficiency improvement coming in 2023, along with the same refrigerant change. So, we always tend to balance both of those.
Yeah, and I'm a student of history, and maybe I'll editorialize just a little bit here because I have just a little bit of dangerous knowledge on this. But we're going back to where we started really as an industry. The air conditioning industry didn't really take off until the invention of the CFC refrigerant. Early inventors and users of air conditioning were toying around with propane and other ammonia and other refrigerants that had issues related to them and didn't allow the industry to really mass produce. It was the invention of the CFC, which is a stable compound, super energy efficient, economical, and that's what allowed air conditioning to grow in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. It wasn't until the discovery of the environmental impacts that we had to dial that back and really placed us back on this path back into history to find, okay, let's go back to look at ammonia and propane and, how we can find a new refrigerant going forward. So it's been an interesting arc and evolution. We have a lot of questions, so let's get into those. And we see people have been upvoting, so that's great. Let's see, the top question so far here is, are there air-cooled heat pumps compatible with single-family homes that are available now for installation in New York State? And are they financially comparable? Is their efficiency comparable?
I can start if you want, John.
Sure.
The biggest issue with air-cooled heat pumps for residential, they're primarily R410A based systems. So it gets into the issues that Steve indicated, that we need the codes and standards approved. And, one of the things we've all learned over the last few years is, we developed an A2L refrigerant, which is a low flammability refrigerant. But getting building codes changed is probably the most torturous process I've ever been through. It takes many, many years to get these building codes updated. You have to update the national model codes and opt them into the states. And so that's where we are right now, is hopefully trying to get all these building codes modified.
Right. So the next question, I think, dives into that a little bit more, which is, what are ways we can advocate for a faster transition vis-a-vis the requirements? John, maybe you can help us understand here, the state could require the industry to only sell new equipment that meets a certain GWP. But if the flammability codes don't allow for it, it's actually illegal for the manufacturer to do that. Can you help us walk through the complexity of how you get a new refrigerant, into the marketplace, not only regulatory wise, but then with the codes? And the spirit of the question here is, how fast is fast? How fast can it go?
Yeah, and this is exactly the situation that we're in California right now, where the state, the regulators were looking to mandate new equipment with A2Ls by 2023, but the building codes hadn't been updated. And there was a mad scramble to try to figure out how to get these codes updated. There was legislation put into the California State Senate. Unfortunately, the COVID kind of blew that up because the session ended early and they weren't able to get anything done. Then the fire commissioners took a look at it. And we just, like I mentioned, we just got news this week that they're not going to update it before 2023. So if if California and if CARB had pushed through with their 2023 implementation date, we could have been in a situation where there wouldn't have been legal new product to be sold in California. And so we're seeing them back off now and give alternatives to move to 2025 because the model codes, and in New York, I believe it's Uniform Mechanical Codes, their next code cycle is typically 2024. And so the way that it should work is that ASHRAE 15 and UL 60335-2-40, and that's for air conditioning and 89 for refrigeration, should be incorporated into these model codes. And there are a few of them, like we use the UMC in New York. And once they're incorporated in the model codes, then each state and sometimes each jurisdiction, so we get down to municipalities or whatever, can incorporate those model codes into their local building codes. And that's kind of the process. But in terms of moving quickly, unless we see some sort of legislative action or some sort of action by somebody like the California Fire Commissioners, we have to wait for the normal code cycle and then the normal adoption into local codes. So that's why the industry is pushing for a January 1st, 2025 date for air conditioning, because we hope that by the 2024 code cycle, the model codes will be updated with these standards and they'll be ready for adoption into state and local codes when these states are ready to transition to A2Ls. Does that make sense?
It does. There's a lot there. We have some more questions in this area, so we'll continue to unpack this issue during the program. And I'll just remind folks to enter your questions and upvote them. And we got some great ones on the line here. Next question is, at what size does refrigerant flammability become an issue for a system?
Well, that's interesting because flammability is defined by the fuel, the amount of fuel, and how easy it is to ignite, right? So if you think about this from a campfire standpoint, right, you start with small things to get a fire started, right, and you don't need much of an ignition source. So charge size is what the industry is going after. So for propane, you want to, or hydrocarbons, you want to minimize the charge size because just about any ignition source will ignite it within a building. So as we move up in being less flammable, the charges can rise. Plus the lower flammability limit allows more fuel to be allowed and before you reach that limit. So that is how the industry is handling this. How much fuel can you have and what are the ignition sources that are present in the room? So we don't, with propane, anything, hydrocarbons, anything can ignite them, light switches, 2Ls, that doesn't occur. So you're allowed to have more in the room. So that's what we're restricted by. And then how much safety factor you want to put on that, right? You don't want to get to the lower flammability limit with a flammable. You want to stay somewhere below it, even if it's a leak occurs. And so we're also implementing sensor technology to sense a leak as well in these larger charge systems. That makes sense, John.
Yeah, so we think these are new because they're new to the US, but these systems aren't new to the world, right? And so help us, tell me about the experience with propane chillers in Europe or other refrigerants, 32 or others in Asia. And, at what scale are these refrigerants already in the global marketplace, even though they're not in the US now?
Yeah, I can add that.
Go ahead, Doug.
Sure. So in Japan, they've decided for R32 that systems up to 3 tons are considered benign and non-flammable, even though they're using a flammable refrigerant. And above that, VRF systems have safety mitigation, pump down systems or leak detections or shut-off valves. And pretty much the same in Europe. We've seen VRF systems up to 10 tons in use in Europe, but there are significant mitigation that needs to be accounted for. And there's additional costs associated with that.
So John, just to specifically answer your question when Doug said about 3 tons, that ends up being there's a limit on the refrigerant charge, about 6.6 pounds or 3 kilograms, which Europe has in place and Japan has in place. And then heavy mitigation occurs above that. So vast majority of all systems around 2Ls, they're below 6.6 pounds of charge where we have our experience. We don't have a lot of experience above that. Hydrocarbons, it's 150 grams roughly. They've approved up to 300 grams now and 500 grams. So we're talking small amounts. And so you'll get some expansion as we get experience. Right. Which is really what we don't have is we have no experience. That's what the fire marshals are concerned about. the fire commission people.
Help our audience understands. Are these unicorns out there in the marketplace, or is this an established marketplace that's managing the risks appropriately, like we manage all risks in buildings? I mean, Dick, are there propane chillers operating in Europe today, and how common are they?
Propane chillers have been around for a long time. It actually goes back to some of the earlier work that Willis Carrier did. But chillers are a little bit different in they're what we call an indirect system. So they're outside the building. You're not leaking refrigerant. We'll often talk about direct systems, and that's where a lot of the new work's coming in. But the thing to keep in mind with these, A2L is a new classification. We created that classification because it's low flammability, and it's like the other guys have said, very difficult to ignite. Just to give you a feel, it takes 11 to 12% concentrations. That's a significant leak. It's almost like you have to chop a hole in the line to even get close to that leak, and then it tends to diffuse very quickly into the space. So we found it extremely difficult to ignite these refrigerants. But the U.S. tends to be, as the other guys have said, tends to be very conservative. So we've gone a little closer. We require more sensors. We require more mitigation. And then an important thing we have to do in the industry is actually train service technicians too. So there's an effort underway to do that.
You do see propane chillers in Europe, and there have been a number of explosions because they have to be ATEX controlled. They have a leak, and then they just find an ignition source, because you can have anything for an ignition source. So what you see being adopted instead are 2L refrigerants in those applications, because then the safety becomes a lot easier for people when they service the equipment mainly. It really can't find an ignition source if you had a major leak like Dick was saying.
Mm-hmm.
A hydrocarbon doesn't take much of a leak to get to the LFL.
Yeah, it's like about 6%. And in most of the instances, like Steve was describing, there's been a few in Europe, and they've always been on the service part of the business.
So the next question, we've danced around this, but maybe just digging into a little bit more is, how will the increased flammability of refrigerants affect the uptake of VRF in New York City? Maybe let's just start with the logistics of this, John. If the model codes approve the new lower flammability refrigerants, how do they actually get approved in New York? They have to go, does the New York City Fire Department have to approve that? Like, what are the steps for that to happen?
Well, I'm not a building code expert in the city of New York, but yeah, I believe that they need to be approved into the building code and whatever the normal building code process is. So in this situation, just like we saw in California, the fire marshals and the fire regulators would likely have to weigh in on these codes and these standards.
Right. But is there any reason for a building owner to wait? There are systems, there's 410A systems today, we talked about that, but the industry is moving to these new systems eventually. You're saying the earliest the code might change is 2024. That's the national model code. Then that's got to trickle down into the local codes. We could be talking 5-10 years away. So is there a reason why building owners should be waiting right now?
Yeah, John, maybe just to start on that is, typically when you go into a building code, you have an AHJ that has to sign off on the equipment. So he's not going to sign off on that equipment, knowing that it's not allowed by the building code. Now, a chiller can be done. Chillers, because they're outside the building, they could be done now. You'd have to qualify them to A2 standards, not A2L. But for direct systems like residential, things like that, we have to have the building codes in place, and they have to be adopted by the local regulatory body.
And yeah, that's what we're really talking about is residential and light commercial. The chillers and commercial refrigeration will be available at these start dates, but it's really these systems, like Dick mentioned, direct systems where refrigerant is in the space, in the occupied space, that we really have to wait for the building codes to accept them.
Right, but there's no, if we believe based on past experience that R410A will be available in the marketplace to service systems, there really is no reason for a building owner to wait if they're interested in electrifying.
No, they should move. I thought to wait to incorporate A2Ls, but no, they should incorporate and purchase new 410A equipment that will be available, and there will be refrigerant available for service well into the future. Yes.
Right. And then maybe to pick up on this, one of the questions here is, what's the implication in retrofits versus new construction, as you think about these new refrigerant? Is there any really, or is one easier to manage from a retrofit standpoint versus new construction?
Go ahead, Dick.
No, I was going to say on retrofits, we've had a lot of discussions in the safety standards. And, when you retrofit, say with a unit with an A2L, let's say it's a residential unit, you'll have to replace the outdoor condensing unit, the indoor fan coil. You'll still be able to use your piping. We actually put prescriptive requirements in there, what you need to do to check that piping, make sure it's safe. And then there's a lot of details on how you set up the system, qualify the sensor, make sure it's working properly. And these are all things that we've actually developed innate training already to educate the installers on how to install this equipment.
So John, if you're doing a large office building though, and you can do water cooled, there's GWP1 non-flammable can be adopted tomorrow in the marketplace. So if you're designing a new building, I don't understand why you wouldn't go water cooled, chiller based systems, bringing water into the building rather than refrigerant. If you want to say, I'm going to be compatible long-term versus, an interim step of the flammable refrigerants at some point. So we see a lot of that in the marketplace where people are changing their minds and saying, well, should I do distributed refrigerant in the building or should I do distributed water? You can see from the innovation that Doug talked about is distributed water is getting some interest, right? More and more, even if it's kind of VRF based where you want to, in a commercial building, bring heat around the building, and pick up waste heat and move it. So I think direct refrigerant systems are going to be, large direct systems. And we were used to putting these huge split systems in, or we're hitting huge VRF systems I've seen in Asia where they do a 6-story office building with one system and there's, 400 or 500 pounds of refrigerant. Those are going away, I think.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add to that too. Keep in mind, these older systems are quite a bit less efficient. The big thing we're after is, let's help the environment, let's reduce emissions. Well, if you put in a more efficient equipment, it could be 40, 50% more efficient than the one that you're taking out. So you're actually doing more because 80, 90% of the emissions come from the indirect, not the direct.
Yeah, that's an important point, right, Dick? So 80 to 90% of the global warming impact of, say, a chiller is the energy it's using,
Exactly.
not the refrigerant if it happens to escape, which it's not designed to do. Maybe, we've been talking about the future, and this kind of just sparked a question in my head. When our successors are doing this panel 50 years from now, are we still going to be talking about the vapor compression cycle? I mean, this has been 100 years of this industry using vapor compression, which means you got a compressor, you need to find the refrigerant. Is this the forever future of air conditioning? I mean, you keep hearing things like you could use sound waves, you could use other things, do you ever see a day where we're away from the vapor compression cycle and these refrigerant considerations?
I think, the Department of Energy has done a nice study in 2014. We look at various different cycles. Vapor compression offers what I look at these different opportunities of innovation. I look at power density. How much cooling or heating can you do per gram of material? Vapor compression by far gives us the biggest capacity and highest COP. I think small type loads, we're probably going to move there maybe. But these large building loads, my counterpart, when I'm 104, John, and if I'm on this panel, we're going to be talking vapor compression. We will be talking lower GWP fluids, obviously. I don't think we'll be doing any more refrigerant transitions. We will be done. And we'll be talking about building loads, right? So instead of using a 1,000-ton chiller on a building, we'll have a 150-ton chiller on a building because we'll be doing better lighting, better insulation, all that stuff, better management of the heat within the building. And I think load of the chiller will go down. So the impact will be, I'm going to have a lower capacity, lower energy use, high efficiency people with a low GWP refrigerant. That's how I see the future in larger buildings, is loads are going to drop.
Yeah, maybe to add to what Steve was saying too, is we need to look at not just the HVAC, we need to look at the building as a system. So like one of the things we're trying to introduce into New York State code right now is a chiller can be both cooling and heating. So if you look at a lot of commercial buildings, the perimeter is in heating, the core is in cooling. we tend to run the boiler and the chiller simultaneously all winter long. Well, you can take that chiller and it can reject heat to another part of the building, raise it in temperature, and the vapor compression cycle is ideal for that. So we're going to be looking at new approaches. We're going to be looking at what I call hybrid systems. You know, do you use more outside air? Do you use free cooling? Do you use evaporative cooling? There's a lot of technologies that the industry is starting to say, you know, let's look at the building as a system.
Right. Well, Steve, when you and I are doing this panel 50 years from now, we can talk about medical technology as opposed to vapor compression technology.
Yeah, I'm hoping some anti-aging stuff appears.
Next question here from the audience. You showed some alternate systems to minimize refrigerants in the space. So how practical are these alternatives? So what I think the spirit of the question here is, how do you reduce charge size so that you reduce the risk of some of these new systems?
I can maybe start. There's a lot of new technology we look at in the industry. It used to be refrigerants were cheap, so we didn't pay a lot of attention to charge levels. But if you go to microchannel heat exchangers, brazed plate heat exchangers, we've seen charge reductions on the order of 50%. So you can start to reduce those, and then we can manage charge better. One of the things that's being looked at for VRFs is, do we add isolation valves so that if you do get a leak, you don't lose the whole charge? And so, you know, this is where the technology is starting to play in as to how we manage the refrigerant in the system.
And Doug, you can jump in here, but you presented some of that, how we manage the charge, how we reduce the charge, right? With indirect systems, direct systems in combination with each other, how you want to move that heat around the building. So the innovation is happening because of the need for handling the flammable refrigerants. It's driving that innovation.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. So I did show a couple of examples. They are both right now in use. So they are practical. Most manufacturers have at least that VRF outdoor with a ducted system that might not be from their company. It may be another company, but it's being controlled by an expansion valve to get the benefits of the efficiency increase of the VRF outdoor unit. For the other units where you've got water serving the indoor space, there's some concerns that we've got to take in the future. There's going to be a Department of Energy rulemaking soon. It's been underway for 2 years now for VRF. And one thing that we did work with the energy efficiency advocates and the environmental advocates was on a maximum sensible heat ratio. So there will be some dehumidification required from these VRF units. And when we're talking about applying that to a water system, that may be a concern for more humid climates. But right now, as I mentioned, those are being used in Europe. They're very popular and have good application and good uptake, and fairly close to the efficiency of traditional VRF systems.
Great. Next question is around CO2, which is, we haven't even gotten into that, so this will be good. So the question is, what are the largest capacity compressors on the market for CO2? And then the subset here is, are there variable speed CO2 compressors? But whoever wants to jump in, maybe let's start a question ahead of this, which is, where will CO2, what's the place for CO2 in the marketplace that we know can work well, and where won't it work well and why? Maybe we start there and then get into the actual question. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, maybe I can start, John. You know, CO2, it's been around for a long, long time. And actually at Carrier, we've got close to about 1,000 stores running in Europe now with CO2. CO2 is a decent refrigerant for refrigeration. It's a terrible refrigerant for cooling because it just has very poor efficiency. And CO2 is an interesting refrigerant. It's what we call a supercritical refrigerant. So it goes above the critical point and it will not condense. So it tends to have very high pressures, upwards of about 2,000 PSI. So it's a good refrigerant. It's also being looked at for heat pump water heaters because it has very high temperatures and can be very effective in heating water. But for comfort cooling, it's not a good refrigerant.
Right, and just for clarity for lay people on the call, so just, you know, when we say refrigeration, we're talking about food or medicine, supermarket. We're talking about lower temperatures sometimes, negative degree temperatures versus cooling at temperate temperatures. But Steve, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I was going to say CO2 has a sweet spot. So in refrigeration, like Dick said, though, if you're in a hot climate and you're trying to do refrigeration with CO2, not a good thing as well. As long as you got to keep the heat rejection temperature down. Now, it has two sweet spots, right? Refrigeration at low reject heat temperature, and also is good for heating. The problem mainly faced is like your question on the compressor sizes, right? We need bigger compressors. We're going to do larger loads. It's really restricted to small load situations at this point. As innovation occurs, CO2 will see more incremental adoption, but it won't be the panacea everybody claims it to be for everything.
But on that hot water side, I've always been taught that CO2 is good at the extremes that you're talking about. If you want to make something really cold, it's good and efficient, and if you want to make something really hot, it's good and efficient. So let's talk about the hot part of it. There's a growing interest to say if we want to electrify multifamily in New York, maybe we go in steps and call hybridize. And so, let's split the hot water away from the steam heat is step one. And so is there a future for CO2 for hot water at retrofit in large multifamily housing in New York City or other cities?
Well, you see some of that adoption occurring in Japan, but that was forced regulation with incentives. But when that incentive was removed, it fizzled because these systems are really expensive compared to traditional systems, right? You actually have to have regulation to make these things cost effective for people. Because you have a vapor compression system versus direct fuel in a boiler, right? It's just going to be easier and cheaper, less complicated, less costly to do that. So to try to, and hot water loads in a building are very small. If you're just doing like showers and dishes and things like that, if you bring in the heating load, then you may have enough load now to make sense, but can you have a large enough system that's cost effective in that area? Is going to be difficult. But then you have to fragment, you're going to have air conditioning as a separate system.
Yeah, we do have that regulatory backdrop. It's just in a different way in New York with our new carbon caps on buildings.
Right.
And so with Local Law 97, buildings will be required, large buildings will be required to reduce carbon emissions 40% by 2030. In a city like New York, 40%, this is just shocking to me when I learned it, 40% of all carbon emissions in New York City come from burning fossil fuels at the building. So 40% of our greenhouse gas problem in the entire city of New York is primarily steam, heat, and hot water. So we will never get to our low carbon goals or compliance with the law unless we attack this particular issue, which is why electrification is so important in the transition from those systems to one that's based on an increasingly renewable grid.
John, one of the things we found, we got spoiled with fossil fuel fired heating because you can make very hot water and it doesn't matter. It's the same efficiency. When you start to look at heat pumps, well, if you reset the water temperature down, then the heat pump becomes very, very efficient. And so we're starting to look at reset temperatures for hot water heating. We're starting to look at reclaiming the heat instead of doing VAV with straight reheat. We use reclaim heat. And all of a sudden now, instead of having a COP of 4, you got a COP of 8. So it takes looking at the building as a system again.
Right. So here's a question. What's the status of R22?
If you have equipment, you can keep using it. And if you can get the refrigerant, that's fine. I had a neighbor used one of these 400 series refrigerants to get rid of his R22 in his equipment. I won't recommend it because, use it to its best sustainable life, maintain its efficiency. And when you have a plan, replace it with 410E equipment.
When did the industry stop making R22 systems? What was the EPA?
Well, in large commercial systems, that was 2010, but there was a loophole within the EPA to allow dry ship condensers, like on my house. My compressor failed or my condenser failed, I could have a dry ship condenser. I didn't have to retrofit my equipment out to 410A. So really that ended in 2016, 2017. Actually, it's still going on today with 407C dry ship condensers. So you can convert your system to a 407C system and have a dry ship condenser. So virgin new refrigerants stopped in 2020 here at the end of 2020, but there is a large installed base of R22. So there's plenty of R22 around. Of course, the price goes with what's available and how much draw. The installed base of R22 continues to shrink. So there's more refrigerant than people need still out there. There's quite a bit.
Maybe, John, one thing we should caution people on, be careful when a lot of times you'll see names come out like R22A.
Yeah.
These are not real qualified refrigerants. In fact, 22A is a hydrocarbon. So be very careful if there's any doubt, because refrigerant manufacturers like to come up with trade names. Be careful with looking at these refrigerants and make sure you check with the manufacturers. Is that a valid refrigerant?
Steve, thanks for the PTSD moment, because I spent about 3 years full-time on that loophole in my previous years.
Well, yes, and some people chose poorly, and somebody chose well on when that loophole was.
To be clear, to close the loophole.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, we were working on that as well.
I know. So the question here, are window air conditioners regulated?
Are they regulated right now, you're saying?
Yeah, so I guess the spirit of the question is, how are window AC units regulated? Like, are they subject to the same refrigerant regulations? Where do you see, refrigerants going from a window AC standpoint, which, New York City is still a large market for that?
Actually, John, technically, window units are regulated on efficiency by the Department of Energy, but EPA approved under 150 grams in their SNAP rulings. So if you go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's now, you're likely going to find a window unit with R32 in it.
Or a hydrocarbon, small.
Or a hydrocarbon, yep, I've seen them both, yep.
So in essence, that part of the market's already transitioned.
It's transitioning. As you get to larger, PTAC, the PTAC ones, they're still using 410A. That'll all occur under this regulation that California and the EPA does. Those will transition probably to less than 750, but whatever's the available technology that's the best and most cost effective that can fit will occur. So you see a lot of R32 ones showing up.
Yep.
There's no regulation yet. So, but people are transitioning, right?
Here's a good question. Can you speak to the phase out of high GWP refrigerants, increasing the value of recaptured and recycled high GWP refrigerants? Could a stronger market for recycled refrigerants decrease illegal venting? So,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, let's talk about the practice in the market today. How easy is it to reclaim these systems, and where do we see that market going with the regulations as we see them?
Well, EPA requires you to reclaim all the refrigerants in the system, right? You're not allowed to vent. So if people vent, they're violating the law. But sometimes people vent, or there's just not enough to be worth a while to reclaim, right? So say you have a 10-pound system, there's a pound left after a leak, right? It's near atmospheric pressure. People do that. We're aware of that. But the value, it's all about value, right? So if you had some kind of incentive, that would, even on HFCs as we move forward, and I think Dick would probably agree with this, it would help, it would accelerate their reclaim and recycle of HFCs.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is in California, when you look at that delay from 2023 to 2025, underneath there's a reclaim requirement. And also when you look at the refrigeration, it was kind of an innovative approach that they approached in California. You have to manage your store. If you do more reclaim, you're allowed to use more refrigerant. So I think the market on reclaim is going to change. I mean, right now, John, it's about 9% of the refrigerant is reclaimed, and we really got to get that up.
So here's a good technical question for a good technical panel. So are any refrigerants better for reducing the impact of reduced capacity at low ambient outside air?
Well, typically you're looking at heat pumps, John. I think is that what you're driving at?
Or is it low condenser water?
Take it how you want it.
Oh, okay. Take it like you want it. Well, if you want to gain heat from outside air in a heat pump, you need capacity. So you need a high pressure gas. Low pressure gases, you just end up with such a low pressure in the system, you have to move a lot of mass. And so you have to get big systems like Dick mentioned earlier, around a 6-inch pipe coming in and out of the house. So when you want to do heat pumping, you want higher pressure gases like 410A, CO2, R32, 454B. If you want to look at the other way, heat rejection outside at low ambience, and say you want to do some low ambient heat rejection in a tower, all the refrigerants COP-wise are about the same in that area, because you don't have the high temperature lift between what you're trying to supply the temperature at and what you're rejecting at. So a lot of refrigerants, when you're down in that low delta T, or what we call temperature lift or rejection, is they're all the same, or nearly the same, and perform the same. Now the equipment may not perform the same, but thermodynamically the refrigerants are the same.
And what we're seeing more, I agree with Steve, what we're seeing more on low temperature heat pumps is changing the cycle. Variable speed will allow you to speed the compressor up at low ambient, so you get good capacity. 2-stage systems, there's ejector cycles that are now going on them to boost the capacity. And so there's a lot of energy right now looking at what we call low temperature heat pumps. Can we get them into climate zone 5, 6, 7, and 8, where the temperatures are cold?
Right. Okay, we just have a minute left before we have to wrap up, and 2 questions, so I think we can do it quickly. So what about materials that allow us to radiate heat from roofs into space, being coupled into rooftop systems, such as radiative sky cooling?
There is some technology now that's coming on the market about radiant cooling for heat rejection, and it's been developed by a couple of the national labs. We're evaluating it, how effective it's going to be. We'll have to see.
I think I have a solar panel system on my house, and it comes down to cloud cover. I live in an area where I have a lot of cloud cover, and you can't radiate to you have to radiate to a clear sky. So I'm assuming New York City is kind of cloudy like La Crosse, Wisconsin, about half the time. So not sure how well it integrated into that area.
Steve, it's always clear skies in New York. By the way, your clouds are very beautiful too, especially today.
Yeah, so I always struggle with my solar panel system because I have clouds.
All right, I'm going to take the last 2 questions and kind of combine them here. One's about what do building owners or operators need to be aware of, but more importantly, what kind of training do you think is needed for either owners, operators, or installers about refrigerants going forward? What would you recommend?
I mean, we've got some good training classes underway. So we have a NATE exam done. I'd encourage people, and John, we can give this to you afterwards. There's been 5 webinars that AHRI has run on further details on training, sensors, what's involved in installing these A2L refrigerants. And, this may be the topic for another, webinar, that we can get into some of the things that educate people on what they have to do with these new systems. There's been a lot of information already done.
Yeah, people are going to have to be more cautious. There are going to be very specific procedures you have to follow with flammables, where you should have followed the same procedure with non-flammable refrigerants, but people are more, it's like, it's safe. So yeah, I have a small leak and I have a torch, no big deal. Tomorrow, that is a big deal when you're doing
Well,
service.
this has been a fascinating discussion. It really helped us unpack the refrigerant issues, and I think we bust all the myths that we could today. But really to help answer the questions and clear the air about, what is fact and what is not about refrigerants going forward. I think the important thing that we've really confirmed is that, this is not a barrier for electrification. I think that's really important to point out. So I want to thank our panel today, Dick Lord from Carrier, Doug Tucker from Mitsubishi Electric, John Sheff from Danfoss, and Steve Kujak from Trane. Thank you very much. It was great to have you on the program today. Caitlin, I think we have a slide on some upcoming programs, right? Yeah, okay, great. So we keep going at Urban Green here with program. By the way, our program attendees are up 40% year to date, so thank you very much. I think it speaks to the great panel like we just had today, but we have a lot more programs going through the end of the year. We have on November 10th, Adapting to COVID Design. This is with our Cross Learning Alliance, our partnership with AIA and ASHRAE. This is a series on adapting to COVID. This particular session will dive into design considerations, so that's November 10th. November 12th is our virtual committee meet and greet. We have 2 great committees at Urban Green that we take new members at the end of the year, our Programs Committee and our Emerging Professionals Committee. If you're interested in joining those committees, come to this meeting, learn about them. And then on November 13th, we have our G-Pro class, Fundamentals of Building Green. It's 4 CEUs. Really popular program about the nuts and bolts about green building and unpacking that. So that's encourage you to attend that. And then finally, full suite of energy code classes that we're providing. The What's New in the Code. This is a free 90-minute overview of the new energy code in New York City and New York State that's available. And then we have a full day Crushing the Code where we do a deep dive into the system, into the nuts and bolts of what's happening in the code, what's changes. That's 7 CEUs. A lot of these courses are still available through the end of the year. So you can go to urbangreencouncil.org/energy-code to register for those. So that takes us to the end of the program. Thank you again to our fantastic panelists with such global expertise. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. We'll see you at the next Urban Green program. Stay safe.